Introduction. Beyond the gleam of legend. As the mist cleared from a battleground cloaked in morning fog, legendary, shining knights stood alongside weary figures in mud-stained tunics. Our minds often picture these knights in gleaming, chivalrous glory. However, reality frequently reveals them as ruthless opportunists, their actions more often spurred by a thirst for power than by honor. Behind these prominent figures were the humble foot soldiers, farmers, artisans, and even outlaws, who formed the resilient core of medieval armies. They wielded not the noble sword, but the simple, sturdy wooden pike. History often overlooked their individual glory, and even their names, yet their blood, their sweat, and the unsanitary camps they inhabited were the very lifeblood of every formidable war machine. This is an invitation to explore the untold narratives that lie beneath the celebrated armor. Let us journey into a world often romanticized in tales, where knights, magnificent in polished steel, traverse the pages of history. The knight. Myth versus reality. But as evening shadows lengthen, the unvarnished truth behind that brilliant facade comes to light. A reality as rough and grounded as the very soil they once governed. Knights, those seemingly virtuous individuals, were far more than the idealized heroes of grand poems. They were warriors forged in the crucible of tribal conflicts and feudal demands, their stories intricately interwoven with themes of dominance and endurance. During an era defined by political upheaval and continuous military campaigns, knights were not merely champions of honor, they were the essential instruments of authority and ambition. Adorned with symbols of allegiance, these armored combatants sometimes acted as brutal agents, driven by the pursuit of territory and standing. While the historical accounts of the time do not completely lack instances of bravery, they frequently portray many knights as formidable military leaders whose swords were often drawn for conquest rather than for defense. The knight's life: blood, treachery, and survival. The existence of a knight was not the glamorous life portrayed in courtly fiction, but one deeply marked by violence and rife with betrayal. When we peel back the gleaming exterior, what remains is a life characterized by rigorous training, fierce combat, and transient victories. From a young age, knights were instructed in the lethal movements of sword and lance. Their days were a relentless cycle of preparation for the chaotic symphony of battle. The noble concept of honor often gave way to the grim necessities of survival. Among knights, becoming a mercenary was a recognized path, blurring the distinction between serving a noble cause and seeking personal enrichment. Such knights, offering their armed services to the highest bidder, traveled across kingdoms, motivated more by financial gain than by renown. Their ambitions often led them down morally ambiguous paths, where arranged marriages, calculated alliances, and land acquisitions were standard strategies in the pursuit of dominance. Against the turbulent backdrop of their time, knights navigated a complex interplay of loyalty and self-interest. The chivalrous code, intended as a guide to virtue, was often in conflict with the pragmatic imperative of staying alive. The medieval landscape was unforgiving, and knights, despite their elevated origins, encountered the same fundamental struggles as the common people. Their narratives reveal a contradiction: knights as symbols of moral fortitude, yet simultaneously yielding to the darker impulses of human nature. Knights served as both agents of justice and embodiments of oppression. Their influence extended beyond the battlefield into the courts and villages, where they enforced feudal law, collected taxes, and rendered judgments. Yet the boundary between order and tyranny was famously permeable. Some knights, abusing their position, descended into the realm of despots, their arbitrary rule serving as a historical testament to unchecked power. Bonds of fealty and shifting allegiances. Bound by oaths of fealty, knights represented the intricate network of tenant and vassal relationships that characterized medieval society. These connections demanded a delicate equilibrium, where allegiance often teetered on the brink of ambition and opportunity. As feudal lords competed for power, knights found themselves navigating this complex and shifting environment, where promises of land and wealth could entice them towards rebellion and perfidy. Chivalry, despite its revered ideals, frequently proved insufficient against the realities of the time. As supposed custodians of valor, knights, in practice, oscillated between the principles of righteousness and the practical demands of strategy. Widely known stories depict knights not only as exemplars of virtue, but also as complex individuals grappling with the challenges of war and political maneuvering. The Knights Templar, devotion and downfall. Within this environment, the Knights Templar emerged as legendary figures, warrior monks sworn to safeguard pilgrims and exert influence in the Holy Land. Their rise and fall mirrored the tensions of the era. Acts of fervent devotion were overshadowed by accusations of heresy and the pursuit of power. The dramatic legal proceedings faced by the Templars encapsulate this tension, illustrating the conflict between spiritual commitments and worldly influence, and casting them as both paragons and pariahs in the developing narrative. Medieval literature and the shaping of myth. Medieval literature played a vital role in immortalizing these knightly figures, presenting them as models of virtue in works such as The Knight's Tale and the Arthurian legends. These narratives, more than mere romantic escapism, served as a lens through which society examined and reflected upon its complexities. As knights occupied the space between reality and myth, these stories created a mutual relationship, constructing legends upon factual foundations and capturing the imagination across generations. The waning of the medieval period and the knight's legacy. As the medieval period drew to a close, changes in military practices and social structures gradually moved the knight into the background of history. Advancements in strategic warfare favored armies where disciplined coordination was more effective than individual bravery. Although their direct role diminished, the knight's legacy remains a significant part of the human story, reflecting the pursuit of both greatness and notoriety. Their myth is a rich tapestry of contradictions, threads of seemingly impossible grandeur interwoven with the harsh realities of life, reflecting the ebb and flow of history, and in whose echoes the truth of their existence resonates. The rise of the foot soldier, from plowshare to pike. In the shadow of medieval castles and beneath the expansive, somber sky, the call to arms echoed through the villages. For many peasants, this summons was a disruptive force, uprooting them from their fields like a storm felling trees. Kings and lords, eager to strengthen their territories or expand their domains, looked beyond the noble knights and enlisted farmers and craftsmen. A transformation that saw agricultural tools exchanged for weapons in a destiny as sudden as it was unavoidable. This military service, often compelled by obligation rather than personal choice, resulted in grim portrayals of reluctant courage. Many men, enticed by the promise of payment, clothing, or even a small plot of land, chose to serve under a noble banner. The stark contrast between the harsh certainty of winter's cold and the unpredictable nature of battle was undeniable. Ironically, these individuals, seemingly minor players, became crucial in executing large-scale strategies that shaped entire regions. The ranks of foot soldiers were as varied as the lands from which they came, each person a unique thread woven into the fabric of medieval armies. Skilled craftsmen who worked with anvils and looms stood alongside those with histories marked by crime. Mercenaries, individuals who fought for hire, added a professional yet unpredictable element, their loyalty shifting with the amount of gold rather than with allegiance. In a society that was unwelcoming to those without work, military service was less about patriotic feeling and more about survival. This melting pot of backgrounds often mirrored society itself, rich in different experiences, marked by internal conflicts, yet bound together by necessity. Arming the foot soldier, pragmatism and resourcefulness. Equipping these soldiers was driven by practicality as much as by the demands of combat. Spears, axes, and pikes were their primary tools, built for durability and utility rather than for decoration. Unlike the elaborately armored knights, foot soldiers wore makeshift protection, padded leather jackets, or salvaged metal pieces, prioritizing function over appearance. Their typical equipment was born out of need, each piece a testament to the ingenuity of local blacksmiths. This resourcefulness allowed soldiers to adapt their gear, creating a collection of weapons and armor that was as effective as it was unrefined. War's allure lay not only in the potential for bravery, but also in the tempting possibility of reward, a potential escape from crushing poverty. For many, regular wages were either meager or non-existent. Instead, opportunities for gain were found in plundering enemy territory or through the hollow echo of empty promises of their lords. Yet the boundary between success and tragedy could be as thin as a dull blade, creating a precarious balance. The spoils of war offered temporary financial freedom, a slim chance of minor social advancement. For those who returned unharmed, the prospect of bringing home plunder was a source of hope, though such achievements were met with both envy and admiration. The psychological toll and camaraderie. Assuming the role of a soldier required a profound shift in identity. Peasants who balanced roles as husbands, fathers, and sons were suddenly thrust into the identity of warriors, their primary allegiance shifting from family to their military unit. The psychological burden of navigating these two worlds could be immense. The serene rhythm of rural life stood in stark contrast to the chaos of war, demanding immense resilience. The internal conflict within these men reflected the fields they left behind, a personal struggle for loyalty. These soldiers often found themselves seeking personal redemption amidst the turmoil. Their stories, as much as their actions, are woven into the narrative of history. Adaptability became a key strength of the foot soldier. Shield walls, iconic for their collective strength, derived power from the unity of those who formed them. Utilizing the terrain to their advantage amidst the confusion of battle became essential. Experienced soldiers learned to integrate the features of the landscape into their military tactics, balancing the ability to move quickly with defensive positioning. Each soldier's effectiveness depended on their ability to interpret the dynamics of the conflict, much like a seasoned farmer understanding a challenging harvest, turning chaos into an advantage with skill and perception. The sense of camaraderie among soldiers transformed the difficulties of conflict into lasting bonds of brotherhood. Shared customs and rituals fostered deep connections formed around campfires, exchanging stories of lost lands and aspirations. Humor, dark and ironic, served as a coping mechanism, a comfort that eased shared hardship. Campfires became spaces where dice games and stories mingled with symbolic tattoos, creating a sense of community that transcended social divisions, a kinship beneath banners marked by resilience, where simple acts of shared humanity persisted. Scars of service and enduring legacy. However, the physical and emotional scars left by military service were permanent. Broken bones and jagged wounds were tangible reminders of battles fought and survived. Medieval medical practices were often brutal, leaving behind histories etched in muscle and bone, a silent language of courage. Returning from the battlefield, veterans carried history within them, their eyes reflecting untold stories. Fitting back into village life was a new kind of struggle, the echo of battle never far from their minds. While historical accounts often prioritize the tales of kings and knights, the contribution of these soldiers is profound. From their humble beginnings, they created unwritten histories, their bravery reverberating through the ages. Their impact, though frequently understated, contributed to the formation of societies that valued endurance and sacrifice. Returning soldiers brought broader perspectives to civilian life, fueling cultural change. Their stories, recorded in time's ledger, remind us of a powerful sense of fellowship, a poignant testament to the human spirit's resilience amidst life's challenges. Long after the final trumpet call fades, training and loyalty, divergent paths. Picture a medieval world where aspiring knights began their demanding journey at the tender age of 7. These young boys, immersed in the traditions and strict training of noble households, embarked on a rigorous path under the watchful eyes of experienced warriors. They honed their abilities in jousting, sword fighting, and archery. Each error could result in severe punishment, their bodies bearing the marks of a world that placed the highest value on martial skill. But this discipline was not solely focused on combat. It instilled a sense of loyalty and chivalry deep within them, alongside the elements of violence and elaborate ceremony. Noble tournaments provided a setting where these qualities were tested and displayed, often masking the brutal reality beneath the magnificent heraldry. For these knights, loyalty to their lords was not simply a matter of heartfelt devotion. It was often a transaction disguised as grandeur, an expectation of receiving land, titles, and power that dictated their allegiance. The chivalric code demanded honorable conduct, yet behind every pledge were silent negotiations, binding them through parchment promises rather than unbreakable ties. However, while knights trained amid ceremony, foot soldiers experienced a much harsher introduction to warfare. Recruited from farms and workshops, These men were transformed from their civilian roles into warriors out of necessity. Lacking formal instruction, their initiation into combat took place amidst the chaos of battle, where teamwork and survival skills were their only teachers. Standing shoulder to shoulder in formations of spears or wielding longbows, they received a brutal education, often focused more on daring survival than on upholding honor. Their understanding came not from theoretical knowledge, but from the battlefield, observing seasoned veterans and directly experiencing the grim realities of medieval warfare. This shared experience fostered a strong sense of camaraderie among them, born not from formal oaths, but from practical necessity and mutual dependence. Their loyalty was as much to their fellow fighters as to the commands of any distant lord, fragile allegiances and the shadow of desertion. In theory, loyalty was the bedrock of feudal relationships, binding knights and soldiers to their lords. However, in practice, these allegiances were often fragile and unreliable. Knights, despite their oaths of fealty, were not above shifting their loyalty if better opportunities arose. The course of fortune was unpredictable, bringing promises of land or prestige that could sway even the most loyal knight. For ordinary soldiers, survival often took precedence over loyalty. Their terms of service were straightforward: food, pay, and protection. If these promises were broken, allegiance was easily abandoned, and desertion was a frequent occurrence in medieval armies. Escaping the unsanitary conditions and disease of camp life, even with the threat of severe punishment, sometimes seemed like the most logical course of action. Desertion was less a matter of shame and more a reflection of systemic failures, a desperate attempt to escape starvation and the ever-present threat of death. When shared grievances were not addressed, mutiny could erupt as a form of resistance. These actions were more than mere chaos. They were often triggered by injustice or unbearable circumstances. Nevertheless, mutinies were quickly suppressed with harsh consequences, highlighting the vulnerability of authority under the immense strain on human endurance. Even in instances of disorder, mutinies sometimes compelled commanders to address legitimate complaints, revealing weaknesses within the rigid power structures. At times, collective defiance achieved what individual voices could not, forcing changes in leadership or military tactics that might otherwise be ignored. The psychological cost of shifting allegiances, the same unstable political climate that influenced mutinies, also contributed to knights changing allegiances. Breaking an oath was considered a grave offense in medieval society, yet knights frequently switched sides to advance their own interests. Medieval Europe was a complex web of feudal ties loosely held together by expediency, where alliances were constantly rearranged with each new claimant to power. Chivalric oaths, though solemnly sworn, often served as bargaining chips, their sacred nature easily disregarded for political advantage. However, loyalty also exacted a psychological cost not recorded in the formal texts of heralds. The constant navigation of shifting allegiances placed a heavy burden on the consciences of both knights and foot soldiers. Trust was a scarce commodity, with the knowledge that comrades could easily become enemies. Within this challenging environment, unexpected bonds emerged from the shared hardship and danger, forming connections that transcended social titles. Amidst this backdrop of uncertain loyalty and potential betrayal, the bonds of camaraderie forged in the intensity of warfare left lasting impressions on those who survived. Knights may have betrayed their lords for personal gain, and foot soldiers too might abandon comrades when survival outweighed feudal duty. While stories often romanticize steadfast knights and unwavering soldiers, the historical reality was far more fragile. These soldiers of fortune remained subject to the unpredictable nature of fate, as each new alliance, recorded on a fragile document, could snap like a twig under the pressures of ambition and survival. Beneath the surface of chivalrous oaths and stoic brotherhood lay trials and triumphs, binding them to the timeless struggle for meaning in a world shrouded in chaos and conflict. Life in a medieval military camp. Filth, fear, and brotherhood. Life in a medieval military encampment was a vibrant yet somber scene, woven with the dark threads of dirt, apprehension, and fellowship. When visualizing these camps, imagine an environment permeated by the foul odor of decay and waste, where the concept of cleanliness was practically non-existent. Both knights and foot soldiers alike found themselves navigating through a mire of rotting food, human waste, and at times the bodies of fallen comrades left to the elements. Disease, a craftier foe. In such harsh conditions, illness was a constant threat, with diseases like dysentery, known as the dreaded bloody flux, decimating the ranks as effectively as any enemy force. Even drinking water, often scarce and contaminated, posed a hidden danger, compelling men to opt for safer alternatives like ale or weak beer due to their minimal alcohol content. However, in this challenging environment, resilience became a necessary quality. The soldiers developed a form of unspoken immunity to their unsanitary surroundings, a grim advantage that allowed some to remain healthy while others succumbed to fever and death. Survival required more than just physical toughness. It demanded camaraderie. Through shared difficulties, men combined their limited resources and knowledge. This fostered a unique sense of brotherhood that surpassed the harsh and often arbitrary social divisions of the time. Together, they formed a resilient community, unified in the face of an unrelenting existence. Fear as a constant companion. Fear was a constant undercurrent, a nearly tangible presence carried by every soldier. The brutal reality of medieval warfare forced them to accept death as an inevitable part of life, particularly when obscured by the darkness of night. Every rustle of leaves or whisper of wind could potentially signal doom. Beyond the horrors of battle, threats also came from disease, starvation, and unpredictable weather, creating a constant sense of anxiety. Instead of succumbing to fear, many soldiers transformed it into determination, finding comfort in fleeting pleasures or the bonds of shared experiences. From the presence of fear arose deep-seated superstitions, rituals, and charms embraced with fervent belief as desperate attempts to gain some control in an unpredictable world. Ironically, these beliefs sometimes led to conflict, sparking disputes over perceived offenses or bad omens. Illustrating fear's dual nature as both a unifying and divisive force, brotherhood amidst gritty existence. Amidst this gritty existence, a unique sense of camaraderie flourished. It was born out of necessity, a bond that transcended societal hierarchies and was rooted in mutual suffering. The continuous hardships of camp life forged unexpected alliances, uniting peasants and nobles in a common fight for survival. This sense of fellowship was a vital support system, fostering loyalty and honor in a setting where rigid class distinctions typically reigned. Men shared whatever little they had, pooling resources out of a collective need that created pockets of resilience within the camp. Around campfires, stories and laughter intertwined with songs, providing comfort for weary souls and forming bonds that often proved stronger than kinship. Navigating feast or famine. Navigating the unpredictable nature of their food supply was another test of their endurance. Soldiers faced a culinary gamble dictated by chance. Success in battle might result in a feast of freshly acquired supplies. Moments of celebration amidst the constant austerity, but such times were temporary. In contrast, the constant threat of scarcity loomed during long military campaigns when supply lines struggled to keep up. Foraging became an essential skill, transforming the natural environment into a source of sustenance through cooperative effort. With rations sometimes reduced to hard bread or simple porridge, hunger served as a stark, constant reminder of the precariousness of life. The underrated role of women in camp life. Women played a vital, though often overlooked role, providing essential support that sustained life in the camps. Often wives, partners, or widows, they were crucial to daily operations, performing diverse roles such as cooks and healers. Their presence created a semblance of normality. Their domestic influence offered brief respites from the grim realities of warfare. However, life in the camps also exposed them to violence and exploitation, challenges they faced with remarkable resilience. Their stories, woven into the larger narrative of war, add depth and humanity, revealing a surprisingly strong and enduring force behind the front lines. Moments of idleness and imposing order. In the rare moments of inactivity, soldiers found release through simple games and competitions. Dice games, with their unpredictable outcomes, mirrored the randomness of war, serving as both a distraction and a way to connect with others. Archery competitions helped hone crucial skills, while music and storytelling provided solace and a sense of community under the stars. Such activities fostered a sense of unity and camaraderie amidst the monotony of waiting for the next call to battle. However, order needed to be maintained amidst the chaos. Discipline was strict and punishments severe to ensure control. Transgressions, whether minor or serious, were met with harsh consequences, ranging from public beatings to execution for desertion. Justice was also a communal matter, with punishment administered by peers helping to maintain cohesion, though it also strained relationships. Despite the severity, there were instances of mercy, reminding one of humanity amidst brutality. The looming threat of desertion. The constant threat of desertion was ever present, driven by fear, dissatisfaction, and homesickness. For some, escaping the relentless grind of camp life seemed more appealing than enduring it. Yet tales of desertion, often understood with empathy and complexity, illustrate the deep human desire for autonomy and agency, even under duress, transience, and psychological battles. In their temporary nature, medieval armies were complex movements relying on intricate logistics across challenging terrains. Adaptability was crucial. Each movement was an unpredictable undertaking that later became stories of success and hardship. Woven into this were the psychological battles fought by each soldier, the emotional toll requiring unique coping mechanisms. Through faith, fellowship, and shared resilience, soldiers created a psychological framework for the harsh realities of medieval warfare. The medieval battlefield: terrain, tactics, and terror. Terrain as a decisive factor. Picture a medieval battlefield, a raw and constantly changing arena where the landscape dictated the unfolding drama of life and death. The land, once pristine fields or winding pastures, rapidly transformed into scenes of chaos, marked by the heavy footsteps of thousands. Hills and forests provided either hidden safety or concealed danger, influencing strategic decisions as much as the enemy's movements. Commanders surveying this scene carefully planned every step of their troops, acutely aware that every natural feature could become an ally or an obstacle. As foot soldiers prepared across these spaces, they felt the palpable tension of impending conflict, a feeling that emanated from both the ground and their collective fear. In this charged environment, strategic positioning often determined victory more effectively than individual bravery. Occupying the higher ground, having the sun at their backs, or using a river to protect a flank, all these environmental factors set the stage for battle, the living chess game of battle. These conflicts unfolded like a living chess match, with commanders acting as skilled strategists, orchestrating an intricate dance where the stakes were life and death. Archers were positioned at the rear, their keen eyes protected by helmets, while infantrymen formed dense ranks, each a vital component of the military force, with cavalry poised gracefully on the flanks, prepared to charge through enemy lines. Then came the thunderous collision, where fate was decided as opposing forces met. The cacophony of metal striking metal, bodies colliding, merged with cries that blurred the distinction between friend and foe. Soldiers, propelled by a mixture of fear and determination, moved in a grim dance where every thrust of a spear or sweep of a blade could alter the course of existence. Amidst such disorder, generals' plans often fell apart, leaving only the primal instinct for survival and the uncontrolled chaos of battle. The raw reality of infantry. For the infantry, the reality was brutal, a field demanding endless endurance and determination. While knights charged, obscured by dust, foot soldiers held their ground in desperate close combat. Here, basic survival instinct was more important than refined training. The shield wall stood as a defiant stronghold, a human barrier of overlapping shields and ready spears, a testament to collective determination and unity. Each soldier understood the consequence of a single break in the line, the potential collapse of the formidable human chain they formed. It was easy to lose oneself in the mud and confusion, where individual identities faded and the survival of the person next to them felt more important than the distant idea of personal glory. Simplicity and strategic deftness. In the whirlwind of battle, simplicity was paramount. Infantry relied on clever yet straightforward tactics. From the unwavering shield wall to the dense phalanxes or defensive formations with spears pointed outward, like a hedgehog. Here, men depended on strategic skill to maximize their threat and minimize their weaknesses. Foot soldiers were indispensable parts of a lethal machine, their success depending on executing orders like hold the line or push. Each man was both an individual fighter and part of a larger entity, employing tactics refined over centuries. Archers, silent specters of death. Beyond the intense close combat were the archers, silent figures weaving death from a distance. Their arrows arced through the air, signaling impending chaos before embedding in flesh. These ranged warriors delivered death with deadly accuracy. Their volleys instilled terror into the fabric of battle long before swords clashed. Their impact could disrupt formations and influence the strategic flow, forcing commanders to adapt or withdraw. The chaotic symphony of war. The medieval battlefield was a chaotic symphony where every clashing blade contributed to an orchestra of war. The metallic clang of sword against shield, the heavy thud of axe meeting armor, all punctuated by the raw sounds of shouted commands and pain. Above this din, the sharp whistle of arrows provided a haunting accompaniment. Shields rang, hearts pounded, and hooves thundered to a relentless rhythm, a score to which soldiers marched into the madness of battle. The cavalry charge. Terror and vulnerability. The cavalry charge, a sight of impressive elegance, brought its own unique terror. Armored knights and lighter horsemen surged forward in synchronized chaos, a force of raw power crashing into the enemy lines like a tidal wave striking the shore. Yet even this magnificent display could falter against concealed ditches or a wall of disciplined infantry, turning their glorious might into a struggling mass. Fear as a weapon. Fear itself became a weapon as potent as any blade, influencing perceptions and decisions. An army's courage might waver at the sight of an approaching enemy, their confidence shattered by echoing trumpets and unfurling banners. Reputation and strategic legends amplified the terror, turning rumors into a formidable opponent in the minds of those on the battlefield. Victory often resulted from knowing how to manage chaos and prevent panic, a testament to the power of mental resilience over mere physical strength. Resilience of the battle-hardened. To survive in this environment required unwavering fortitude, a quality embodied by those hardened by battle. These veterans understood the delicate balance between chaos and order, cultivating both instinct and strategic foresight. New recruits depended on these experienced individuals whose knowledge could guide them through a storm of violence and death with calculated precision. The cost of conflict and enduring narratives. After the battle, as silence fell over the field, the true cost of medieval conflict was painfully evident, littered with injured bodies and scattered weapons. Survivors, their existence weighed against the solemn quiet of the fallen, shouldered memories etched in blood and steel. From these somber scenes emerged stories of resilience and human determination, standing as lasting testaments in the turbulent course of history. The medieval battlefield, a realm of both dramatic tragedy and life-changing triumph, remains in our imagination as a stark reminder of the thin line between life and death. Weapons of war, sword versus spear. The knight's sword, power, lineage, and prestige. In the Middle Ages, the difference between a knight's sword and a foot soldier's spear was as distinct as the weapons themselves. For a knight, a sword was more than just a tool. It represented power, lineage, and the code of chivalry, often intimately linked to their very identity. Blacksmiths crafted these swords with great skill, shaping steel into a balanced and durable symbol of prestige, frequently adorned with jewels and engravings, each one a work of art. Despite their beauty, swords were also instruments of survival and dominance on brutal, blood-soaked fields. They cut through not only enemy flesh, but also the rigid social barriers that maintained the structure of feudal society. Yet while a sword elevated its bearer to a noble status, it was also a sharp reminder of the privileges that separated the knight from the commoner. The foot soldier's spear, a democratic weapon. In stark contrast, the spear was a weapon for the many. Simple, effective, and easy to produce, it armed armies with efficient lethality. Soldiers quickly and inexpensively constructed spears from wood and iron, enabling entire regiments to form formidable walls of sharp points. While knights may have scorned them for their lack of elegance, spears were incredibly effective. Their long reach was capable of piercing a knight's armor or halting a cavalry charge in its tracks. The spear proved decisive in battles, demonstrating the collective strength of those without noble lineage. Here lay the spear's quiet power. It was a great equalizer, a tool that gave the common soldier the potential to challenge elite forces through sheer force of numbers and coordinated effort. Craftsmanship and medieval priorities. The craftsmanship behind these weapons of war reveals much about medieval priorities. Swords required expert metallurgical skills, reflecting an economy where artistic skill and practical function were combined under the patronage of the nobility. Each sword bore heraldic symbols, intertwining the concepts of duty and divine will. In contrast, the creation of spears emphasized practicality, built for combat rather than display. They embodied resourcefulness and adaptability, their straightforwardness a testament to the achievements of ordinary men in desperate circumstances. Armor, protection, and status. The role of armor in medieval warfare was crucial. For knights, armor was not only protection, but a symbol of their status, constructed from interconnected steel plates that could withstand sword blows, but were vulnerable to spear thrusts aimed with precision at joints and gaps. Armor was extremely expensive, highlighting the economic divide between social classes. A foot soldier's defense was often improvised, using padded clothing or makeshift pieces, a necessary adaptation against the armored might of knights. Tactics, coordinated charges versus disciplined ranks. Effective tactics were essential for using both swords and spears. Knights employed coordinated, powerful charges to break enemy lines, relying on shock and intimidation. Their mounted assaults emphasized spectacle and symbolic power. In contrast, infantry wielding spears formed disciplined ranks, shield walls designed to stop even the fiercest cavalry attack. Embodying the essence of collective resilience over individual bravery, the spear demanded unity, a shared mindset where survival depended on working together rather than on the isolated heroic deeds of individuals. Symbolic roles and ideology. Beyond their practical use in combat, swords and spears held deep symbolic meaning in medieval beliefs. Swords were the subject of legend, appearing in mythical tales that placed them at the center of royal and divine narratives. They symbolized divine justice, their cross-shaped guard mirroring the sacredness of spiritual struggle. Spears, though less romanticized, represented perseverance, a cultural symbol of the common soldier's ongoing fight against oppression and adversity. Where swords symbolized individual achievement, spears celebrated the strength of the community, connecting historical narratives of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. Psychological impact and evolution. The psychological effect of these weapons on the battlefield was significant. A knight charging with a sword was a terrifying yet awe-inspiring sight, a representation of noble ferocity. Yet his dominance was countered by the collective strength of the spear wall. The spear instilled courage, giving foot soldiers the psychological edge to face armored enemies. Their sheer numbers transformed fear into determination. As warfare evolved, so too did the sword and spear. Technological advancements led to the creation of swords designed for new types of combat and social roles, while spears gave rise to various polearms that met the changing demands of the battlefield. Yet, through these transitions, both weapons left a lasting mark on cultural memory, embodying myths that persisted long after gunpowder altered the nature of war. Legacy, reminders of ambition and perseverance. Today, the legacy of swords and spears resonates through history as more than just artifacts of battle. They serve as reminders of human ambition and perseverance. These weapons were not merely forged metal, but carried the societal values and struggles of medieval people, reflecting their timeless search for honor, survival, and a shared identity. Resentment and resistance, the hidden storm. Simmering discontent beneath the banners. Beneath the vibrant spectacle of medieval banners, a simmering resentment existed, like a hidden storm. Knights, adorned in elaborate armor and enjoying the privileges of their noble birth, often regarded the humble foot soldiers with disdain. For these ordinary men, torn from their farms and workshops, those symbols of grandeur represented not just the kingdoms they served, but a rigid social structure that placed them at the bottom. Desperation and unspoken ambitions intertwined, fostering a deep undercurrent of dissatisfaction. Fighting for survival and a meager living, their expendability was a painful realization, more bitter than the ingrained dirt that permanently stained their hands. In this world, the expectation of loyalty clashed with the harsh realities of medieval warfare's hierarchical structure. Frustrations rooted in lived experiences. The frustrations were deeply rooted in their daily experiences. Foot soldiers often endured the worst of military campaigns, navigating through mud and blood while knights rode above them. The inequality in rewards and recognition intensified tensions, with knights reaping substantial benefits from collective victories, while the common soldiers were quickly forgotten. Each battle presented a harrowing scene, with foot soldiers defending against experienced knights, all the while knowing their sacrifices would be the first to be erased from memory. Imagine standing among fallen comrades, only to realize that the victories of yesterday would soon be overlooked. Beneath the fluttering heraldry of the banners, a storm of resentment was brewing, waiting for the right moment to erupt. Knights' culture, status, and disconnect. Knights thrived in a culture that celebrated lineage and military prowess, along with a perceived divine right to command. As symbols of bravery, they were often somewhat protected from the brutal realities of warfare that consumed countless lives. Viewing themselves more as orchestrators of destiny than merely part of an army, their status cast long shadows over the foot soldiers, deepening the divisions in armor, weaponry, and living conditions. This disconnect became evident as knights viewed a soldier's death as a mere statistic, while the death of a fellow knight was a cause for mourning. However, from the perspective of the foot soldiers, knights appeared as privileged overseers, their lives safeguarded by armor and alliances, while their own lives were considered disposable. Shared trenches became spaces where suspicion and envy festered, reinforcing divisions with every command issued from above and increasing the volatility among the common soldiers. The unseen weight of sacrifice. Foot soldiers carried the unseen burden of sacrifice, forming the essential core of medieval armies without receiving adequate recognition. When the call to arms was sounded, it was not only knights who responded, but also cobblers, blacksmiths, and farm laborers who exchanged their tools for weapons. Each step onto foreign soil was heavy with the weight of personal sacrifices, marked by a longing for the farms and families left behind. Yet in the songs celebrating victory, their contributions quietly faded into the background of knightly tales. From sunrise to sunset, the life of a foot soldier was a testament to relentless endurance and hardship. The disparity in rewards exacerbated resentment, reducing their sacrifices to invisible contributions, a mere footnote in the accounts of celebrated knightly valor. Blurred class distinctions and fleeting alliances. In the intense environment of battle, however, class distinctions sometimes dissolved. A sense of camaraderie born of survival emerged amidst shared hardships and acts of bravery, forging bonds that defied aristocratic norms. Standing side by side, knights and foot soldiers charged the enemy and faced death together, finding unity in their shared struggle. Yet these alliances were temporary, quickly overshadowed by the reality of noble privilege once the battle concluded. Gathered around campfires, sharing stories of narrow escapes, foot soldiers understood the transient nature of such bonds. A knight's temporary camaraderie was often eclipsed by the return to the usual inequalities, leaving soldiers to cope with the harshness of their ordinary lives. Acts of defiance and subtle resistance. Acts of resistance by foot soldiers were prevalent in this medieval setting. They endured hardship without being broken. They resisted the hierarchical injustices embedded in the medieval military system. Desertion, although punishable by death, remained common as soldiers sought refuge elsewhere, escaping the control of their feudal lords. Subtle acts of sabotage, such as misplacing weapons or delaying orders, served as forms of protest. Through stories mocking knightly foolishness and whispered sarcastic songs, they expressed their hidden dissent. Although such actions rarely fundamentally changed the overarching system, they fostered a sense of autonomy among these men. Retreats, betrayal, and fractured alliances. Retreats magnified underlying tensions as order devolved into chaos. Class distinctions could either disappear or intensify in the frenzy. For knights, a retreat was a humiliation, a blow to their honor. For foot soldiers, it represented a practical decision between survival and futility. As knights retreated, Desperately trying to maintain their status, foot soldiers were often left to deal with the consequences of betrayal. These clashes exposed the raw reality of alliances and left scars on both the battlefield and in the hearts of the soldiers. The constant undercurrent of resentment meant that alliances were fragile. Fractured alliances created vulnerabilities that enemy forces could exploit, with fragile trust sometimes turning into bitter conflict on the battlefield. Disillusionment and overlooked worth. The reality of knights as manipulative figures led foot soldiers to view them as contributing to their own peril, and unequal treatment fueled defiance. Disillusionment set in early as broken promises of glory revealed harsh truths, replacing knightly reverence with cynical skepticism. Knights, often lauded as wise leaders, frequently underestimated the value of foot soldiers, disregarding their first-hand experience of warfare. This oversight led to lost battles and fragmented armies, where retreat became a pragmatic choice, underestimated by knights blinded by their own importance. Conclusion: hope, struggle, and recognition. Beneath every banner lies a story of hope and struggle, a testament to humanity's search for recognition amidst the complexities of war and class. Case studies: unsung heroes of medieval battles. Bannockburn, 1314, terrain as ally. Let us turn our attention to the muddy fields of Bannockburn in 1314, where the Scottish, led by Robert the Bruce, transformed the swampy terrain into a powerful ally. With pikes held firmly in calloused hands, Scottish foot soldiers stood resolute against the formidable threat of English knights, whose pride rested in their noble lineage and gleaming armor. The marshy ground conspired with the Scots, turning the knights' powerful horses into liabilities. What appeared to be a certain victory for the armored nobility quickly dissolved into chaos as the disciplined schiltrons, a defensive formation of spears held by the Scots, pierced both the bodies and the arrogance of their enemies. This was not a story of individual knightly bravery, but a collective uprising where the anonymous masses turned the tide of battle and carved their names into history stone, albeit without the ink of recognition. Agincourt, 1415, grit over Polish. Fast forward a century to the rain-soaked fields of Agincourt in 1415. Here the English army, heavily reliant on their longbowmen, faced a massive French force. The heavy rain from the previous night created a quagmire that transformed the battlefield into an unexpected advantage. As the French knights struggled across the mud-saturated ground, English longbowmen unleashed volleys of arrows that filled the air like menacing shadows. Protected by sharpened stakes, these common men wielded their longbows with deadly accuracy. The French cavalry, bogged down and disoriented, met their fate not in the noble melee, but in the treacherous mud. What unfolded was a triumph of grit over polish, of the mud-covered common soldier achieving glory over the shimmering knight. Courtrai, 1302, cornerstone of infantry strength. Meanwhile, in 1302, the Flemish army turned the Battle of Courtrai into another pivotal demonstration of infantry strength. Known for the golden spurs taken as trophies, this clash between the Kingdom of France and the County of Flanders highlighted the effectiveness of urban militias. Artisans and merchants, typically shielded from the horrors of war, employed clever tactics and utilized the terrain to their advantage. They repelled the French knights' charge with ingenious fortifications and strategic use of marshes. These unexpected heroes translated their practical experience into unwavering resilience, confronting the best military forces Europe had to offer with little more than sheer determination and basic weaponry. Siege of Orleans, 1429. Unsung deeds. In the Siege of Orleans, while much attention is given to Joan of Arc's bravery, let us not forget the anonymous individuals whose actions were fundamental to the miraculous events of 1429. The defenders, primarily composed of common soldiers, were essential to the city's ability to withstand the siege. Under constant threat, they undertook dangerous tasks, breaking enemy lines to reverse the course of events. It was not merely strategic planning, but an unsung tenacity that preserved Orleans. They were resolute, conducting daring nighttime raids, strengthening the resolve of the besieged city with acts of quiet heroism. Inventive spirit in frontline accounts. Across the history of medieval warfare, we see the innovative spirit of the common soldier fundamentally reshaping the very nature of battle. Consider the wagon forts of the Hussite Wars, where peasants formed mobile barricades using chained wagons, from which they repelled attacks with modified farming tools and early hand cannons. These improvised fortifications became their stronghold. Their ingenuity accomplished what expensive, gleaming steel could not, diminishing the power of heavily armored knights. We should also remember the chronicles and letters that recount the first-hand experiences of those who endured the horrors of medieval warfare. Stirling Bridge in 1297 captured the spirit of foot soldiers and lower-ranking nobility, utilizing the familiar landscape as both a defense and a weapon. Similarly, letters paint vivid pictures of chaos and even moments of laughter amidst the violence, recording how men united against overwhelming odds through shared, whispered encouragement and standing shoulder to shoulder in strength. Brotherhood in the cacophony of battle. In the noise and confusion of battle, shared struggles forged an invisible chain of brotherhood. Here lay a unity that went beyond mere alliances, beyond the directives of high lords. It was a world where even wounded individuals would support one another, weaving together bonds formed in both triumph and tragedy. As they faced disease, starvation, and the enemy's assault, it was their brotherhood, an unshakable anchor amidst the storm, which often tipped the scales between life and death. Victories challenging norms and shaping society. Victories achieved under these dire circumstances sent ripples that disturbed the rigid structure of medieval society. They quietly challenged established norms and redefined bravery beyond noble birth. Their successes defied conventional wisdom and influenced the course of society, subtly influencing both kings and commoners alike, sowing the seeds for gradual transformation. The enduring narrative of the unsung masses. So as the flickering firelight fades on this story, remember that although the spotlight often shone on royalty and knights, it was the sweat-drenched, weathered faces of these unsung masses who truly witnessed the brutal reality of battle. Their lives tell a story etched not in elaborate tapestries, but in the land itself. A narrative of ordinary people overcoming adversity against persistent challenges, leaving marks that extend beyond linear historical time. The undiscriminating hand of death in medieval warfare. Death as an omnipresent actor. In the arena of medieval warfare, death played an impartial role, an ever-present force indifferent to the status or bravery of its victims. Silent arrows flew through the air, disregarding the shining armor of knights as easily as the worn tunics of foot soldiers. The chaos of battle reduced everyone to their most fundamental state. Human lives were caught in the unforgiving randomness of combat. Warriors wielded swords that could just as easily strike the heart of a nobleman as that of a commoner. Shields and heraldry offered no protection against the unpredictable path of a crossbow bolt, dismantling the elaborate social distinctions that medieval society so carefully constructed. Fear and curious camaraderie. The fear of death was palpable, a phantom that hovered over every soldier. Yet it also created a curious sense of camaraderie among these men. Despite the rigid social hierarchies that defined their daily lives, facing mortality erased distinctions, forging an unspoken bond among individuals as they confronted a shared fate. Together, perhaps reluctantly, they accepted the grim understanding that death held no preference for lineage or social standing, treating everyone with the same detached inevitability. Disease, a craftier foe. Beyond the immediate brutality of swords and arrows, disease presented an even more insidious threat. The unsanitary conditions of the camps were breeding grounds for illnesses far more devastating than any battle. Plague, dysentery, and typhoid swept through the encampments, showing no favoritism as they claimed the lives of kings and stable boys alike. Medieval medicine, based more on superstition than on scientific understanding, offered little relief. While combat could result in a swift end, disease was a slow, agonizing tormentor, altering the destinies of entire armies and at times changing the course of history itself. Solace, salvation, and the haunting legacy of wounds. Amidst this challenging environment, priests quietly moved among the soldiers, offering comfort where they could. On the eve of battle, soldiers sought to make peace with their God. Last confessions were whispered to priests as solemn rituals were conducted in the dim light of dawn. Religion provided a flicker of hope, a promise of salvation beyond the battlefield, where war's unpredictable cruelty held sway. Yet not all outcomes were left solely to the fortunes of combat and spiritual belief. Warfare left behind a haunting legacy of injuries. The battlefield, marked by gruesome wounds, was a place where a knight with a shattered leg faced the same grim choices as a peasant pierced by a bolt. Medieval medical practices, often more brutal than compassionate, frequently involved painful treatments, including cauterization and crude amputations, each a desperate gamble for survival. Crossbowmen and archers, death from afar. Crossbowmen and archers, often underestimated yet deadly, delivered death from a distance. Their arrows and bolts, arriving without warning, were the silent harbingers of doom that could determine the outcome of battles. The lethal accuracy of an arrow could humble even the most powerful, bypassing armor and prestige alike. This quiet devastation foreshadowed a new form of warfare, one that would define future conflicts. Aftermath, pragmatic responses, and bonded memory. The aftermath of battle demanded swift, practical responses to the certainty of death. The fallen lay scattered, stripped of the social identities that had once defined them. Mass graves became common practice, absorbing individuals into a collective anonymity. This practical approach served both as a measure to prevent the spread of disease and a testament to war's relentless nature. The anonymous burial pits, while marking the end of individual lives, symbolized a shared sacrifice and a collective memory of loss, a legacy whispered among the living. Bravery persisting in legend. Despite the finality of death, stories of bravery persisted, transformed into legends by traveling performers and historians. These tales commemorated the gallantry of knights and the resilience of soldiers. Songs and stories immortalized their deeds, even as rain and time erased their physical traces from the earth. The legends celebrated heroism and served as a solemn remembrance of the lives consumed by war. Death driving change. Death paradoxically also instigated change. The demise of a single noble could shift power dynamics, disrupt kingdoms, and lead to far-reaching societal changes. With potential heirs on the battlefield and lines of succession at risk, the stability of kingdoms rested on the uncertain outcomes of battle. For families, the loss of a father, son, or brother brought immediate hardship, prompting societal adjustments as widows assumed new roles and communities adapted to the absence of their members. Medieval outlook and cultural expressions. The medieval perspective was deeply influenced by the inevitability of death. Artistic representations reflected this acceptance. From depictions of the dance of death illustrating the universal nature of mortality, to the folklore and songs that intertwine the joys of life with its temporary nature. These cultural expressions served as both a form of mourning and a celebration of life's intangible essence. Mortality, reflection, and transient beauty. For those who engaged in combat, the awareness of mortality cultivated a unique and introspective perspective. The looming certainty of death spurred both existential reflection and a vivid appreciation for the fleeting beauty of life. Letters written during the quiet intervals of war speak of the pointlessness of ambition and the profound simplicity of existence, offering a glimpse into the souls of men who lived under the shadow of death. These expressions became integrated into the cultural fabric, creating legends that not only resonated with their own time, but also echoed through history, whispering the age-old truth that life, overshadowed by death, is to be cherished even as it fades. Legacy of the foot soldier, anonymous architects of history, overshadowed by grandeur. In the grand narrative of history, knights and kings often capture the imagination, their stories embellished with layers of song and legend. Yet hidden behind every celebrated battle and majestic account is the untold history of countless foot soldiers, the anonymous thousands whose resilience shaped outcomes and secured victories. Drawn from the ranks of peasants and serfs, their weapons were often rudimentary, their armor little more than leather or cloth. These men bore the heaviest burden of warfare, their sacrifices forming the foundation upon which legends were built. Indispensable despite anonymity. Despite their anonymity, these soldiers were indispensable. Their lives, marked by hardship and brevity, contributed as much to the victories celebrated for generations as did the prominent knights who led them into combat. The paradox of their anonymity is evident in historical accounts that focused on knightly bravery while overlooking these shadowy figures whose contributions were essential. even if unrecognized. Without their unwavering endurance, those widely celebrated victories would barely be recorded in the annals of time. Behind every soldier, a human story. Behind every soldier lies a human story. Peasant farmers, blacksmiths, or villagers were propelled into the brutal necessities of warfare. Compelled into service or enticed by the promise of plunder, they traded their tools for weapons and an uncertain future, bound by allegiance to a lord or ruler. Such transformations were sudden, with minimal training, driven by economic hardship and territorial disputes. These men were motivated by a variety of reasons: escaping difficult circumstances, the lure of adventure, and the promise of glory. The shift from civilian life to soldier was more of a psychological leap than a physical change. Once laboring in familiar surroundings, they now assumed the mantle of mortality, becoming warriors forged by desperation, camaraderie, and bonds on the battlefield. Their contributions went unrecorded in the accounts of peacetime. Yet the camaraderie and bonds formed on the battlefield were undeniable. These relationships transformed them, uniting individuals from diverse backgrounds into forces capable of facing the chaos of medieval warfare. Their personal stories, overshadowed by the narratives of knights, became the immeasurable foundation of military engagements. Vastly different worlds, class divisions. The medieval battlefield was a place of chaos, brutality, and unforgiving conditions. Foot soldiers faced harsh environments with simple spears, axes, or adapted farm implements. Hand-to-hand combat blurred the lines between life and death, where the outcome often depended less on armor than on sheer resolve. These battles were fought at close quarters. Their victories were determined by the collective ferocity of soldiers who formed human barriers that even disciplined knights could not break through. Amidst this chaos, profound bonds formed among foot soldiers, cultivated by shared survival and mutual understanding. Lived experiences in the camps forged trust and loyalty, extending beyond mere survival to encompass profound friendships. Soldiers from disparate backgrounds found solidarity, uniting through hardship and mutual defense, fighting for each other as much as for a cause. This unity softened the relentless nature of warfare and provided comfort amidst uncertainty. Despite fighting on the same battlefields, knights and foot soldiers inhabited vastly different worlds. Class distinctions underscored this contrast, with knights glorified by the code of chivalry and soldiers perceived as mere support troops. This divide extended beyond the battlefield, influencing societal perceptions. Disdainful glances from knights bred resentment. Yet the hierarchy persisted due to deeply ingrained social structures and the necessity of discipline. Occasionally, the demands of survival would create moments of mutual respect, bridging the social chasm. Historical retellings and myth-making. Historical accounts often romanticize battles, transforming grim realities into legends. While chronicles praised the virtues of knights, the anonymous ranks of soldiers were frequently the true heroes. Their struggles were integral to the fabric of mythical Europe, and their presence gave life to medieval warfare. Artistic depictions often obscure their faces, depicting them as indistinct figures. Yet they remain the essential core of any conflict. War as the great equalizer. War, the great equalizer, claimed the lives of both noblemen and peasants without prejudice. On medieval battlefields, social distinctions crumbled before the indiscriminate reach of death. Arrows and swords took lives regardless of rank. Disease, injury, and fatigue affected everyone equally in the chaos. Alliances were formed out of necessity rather than feudal obligation, leaving behind stories that reminded future generations of shared vulnerability amidst the threat of war. Landscapes as silent witnesses. The landscapes where medieval armies clashed stand as silent witnesses to courage and sacrifice. Fields, rivers, and hills bear witness to the dramas that unfolded, enriched by the lives of the soldiers who fought and died there. Transformed over centuries, these places echo with history, serving as reminders of mortality and bravery. Such sites, beyond their military significance, embody courage across all ranks. Legacy permeating cultural consciousness. Though largely overlooked in formal history, the legacy of foot soldiers permeates cultural consciousness. Oral traditions, folk tales, and myths capture their contributions, offering glimpses into the complex experiences of the medieval era. Ballads and local stories echo the courage and survival instincts of these anonymous warriors, validating their sacrifices within the human spirit. Modern reinterpretations honor perspectives that were once silenced, showing that every layer of history contains stories waiting to be uncovered. Conclusion: profound impact and lasting legacy. As our journey concludes, we reflect on the profound impact of foot soldiers on medieval history. Although overshadowed by the grandeur of knights, they were the critical foundation of military endeavors. These men faced extraordinary challenges with resilience, shaping the nature of human conflict and its resolution. Their names may remain unknown, but their legacy endures in the epic tales we explore today. Let us remember their contributions, acknowledging them not as mere background figures in history, but as essential builders of the medieval era. If you have been captivated by these stories of the past, please consider hitting like and subscribing to our channel for more narratives that bring history to life.